Every time I stand up, I'm doing something almost no other mammal does. And the weird part? I'm actually terrible at it. My back hurts, my knees wear out, my feet collapse. And evolution made childbirth one of the most dangerous events in the animal kingdom just to make this walking thing work. The human pelvis had to shrink to balance us, creating a literal bottleneck for our survival. We traded safety at birth for the ability to walk. If I were designing a body from scratch, I don't think I'd choose this. So I have to ask, why? Why did evolution take an animal that already walked perfectly well on four limbs and convince it to stand? Because from where I'm standing, it almost looks like a terrible trade. And the more I looked into it, the stranger this story became. Not because scientists don't have ideas, they have lots of them. The problem is, almost every theory explains part of the puzzle and breaks somewhere else. So instead of asking what happened, I want to ask something much more interesting. What was worth sacrificing millions of years of comfortable movement? When I first started reading about this, I thought I already knew the answer. Forests disappeared, grasslands spread. Our ancestors stood up so they could see over the tall grass. Simple, it made perfect sense. Except that's not what the fossils say. The deeper I went, the less convinced I became. Because some of the earliest ancestors that appear to have walked upright weren't living in wide open savannas at all. Many lived in woodlands, places with trees, lots of them, which immediately made me wonder, if they were still climbing trees, why bother standing at all? That's when I found Ardipithecus ramidus. She lived about 4.4 million years ago, and honestly, she wrecked the neat story I had in my head. She could walk upright. Not perfectly, not like I do, but clearly enough. The strange part was her feet. She still had a grasping big toe. She could climb remarkably well, so here was an animal living among trees, still built for climbing, already experimenting with walking upright. That wasn't supposed to happen, at least not according to the simple version of the story, which forced me to ask a different question. Maybe walking upright wasn't invented for walking. That idea kept coming back. Maybe it started for something completely different. Imagine reaching for fruit. Standing upright lets you grab branches without climbing all the way up. Some primates still do this today. They briefly stand, pick fruit, then drop back down. What if my ancestors simply started doing that over and over and over again? Could millions of tiny moments eventually change an entire species? It sounds almost ridiculous. Until you remember, that's exactly how evolution works. Tiny advantages, repeated for millions of years. Then another question hit me. Why do I assume walking on two legs is inefficient? It certainly feels awkward. Watch a gazelle run. Watch a wolf sprint. Watch literally any cat. Compared to them, I look ridiculous. But appearances can be deceptive. Researchers who measured energy use discovered something I wasn't expecting. Humans are incredibly efficient walkers, not runners, walkers. Compared with chimpanzees, covering the same distance costs us dramatically less energy. That surprised me, because suddenly, walking upright didn't look like a mistake anymore. It looked like an investment. If food became harder to find, being able to travel farther without burning as much energy could quietly change everything. Not overnight, over hundreds of thousands of generations. But then I ran into another problem. If energy was the answer, why do I have hands that suddenly became free? That's a pretty significant coincidence. Once my hands weren't needed for walking anymore, I could carry things, food, stone tools, wood, water, children. That changes your entire way of living. Some anthropologists even think carrying food back to family members strengthened cooperation. Maybe walking upright wasn't just changing anatomy. Maybe it was changing relationships. Then I found my favorite theory. Not because it's proven, it isn't, but because it's beautifully simple. Heat. Think about standing outside at noon. If I'm on all fours and my entire back is exposed to the sun, stand upright, and suddenly much less of my body faces direct sunlight. Even better, my head and torso rise into faster moving air, where cooling becomes easier. No weapons, no intelligence, no dramatic survival story, just physics. I love that because evolution doesn't care about dramatic. It cares about tiny advantages. But here's what keeps bothering me. Every explanation sounds reasonable until it's supposed to explain everything. Then cracks start appearing. Seeing over grass doesn't explain woodland fossils. Energy efficiency doesn't explain climbing adaptations. Carrying food doesn't explain why upright posture appears so early. Heat doesn't explain every environment, and every theory gets me closer. None gets me all the way there. And honestly, I think that's what makes this mystery so fascinating. Then I remembered something I'd seen years ago. The Laetoli footprints. They're almost 3.7 million years old. Volcanic ash froze them in time. Someone walked there. Heel first, then the arch, then the toes. Exactly the way I do today. I find that astonishing. Because whoever made those footprints wasn't human. Not really. Their brain was much smaller. They had no cities, no writing, and no agriculture. And yet, their footsteps look hauntingly familiar. I can almost imagine following them. Sometimes I think we tell the story of evolution backwards. We look at ourselves and assume every change was leading here, as if evolution had a plan. It didn't. Evolution has no finish line, and no blueprint, no goal, only whatever happened to work slightly better than the alternative. Maybe upright walking wasn't supposed to create humans. Maybe it simply solved one small problem, and millions of years later, it accidentally made everything else possible. Which brings me back to where I started. Why? Why did humans evolve to walk upright? After reading the research, I don't think there's one answer. And strangely, that answer is more satisfying than I expected. Because nature almost never bets everything on a single advantage. It stacks tiny improvements, energy, heat, carrying, feeding, seeing farther. None of them may have been enough alone. Together, they may have quietly rewritten the future of an entire lineage. Every step I take is the result of millions of years of compromises. A spine that isn't perfect, knees that wear out, feet that ache, a body that's still carrying the fingerprints of an ancient experiment. And somehow, that experiment worked. Not because it was perfect, because it was good enough. Maybe that's the most human story of all.